2,000 or so stores. The company's mission, according to the company handbook, was to fulfill its members' continued desire through a cooperative effort to meet with the economic pressures facing each business. It also allowed a more flexible arrangement than the conformity expected by other co-ops, such as Ace Hardware. But, like them, its job was survival. Liberty is not the only co-op I've encountered in my family's past. When I take a ride in a nearly automated tractor with one of my grandfather's nephews, who still farms near Greeley, he tells me about how he brings his sugar beets to Fort Morgan for processing. He is a member of the Western Sugar Cooperative, a descendant of the same Great Western Sugar Company that brought our ancestors to Colorado after they arrived at Ellis Island in 1907. Thanks to the co-op, he keeps up the old family crop. Nobody told me when I was growing up that this particular way of doing business had so much to do with our family history. Why should they? Why would the kind of company matter? More than a century later, here I am. I was raised back east, lived on both coasts, and then wound up returning, from New York City to Colorado with my wife and our unborn son, who would enter the world an hour's drive from the nameless spot where my grandfather did. Compared to what it was in his time, Colorado is another kind of place, a land of ski resorts and hydraulic fracturing and tech startups. Cooperative business shores up the area's burgeoning affluence. The mortgage-lending credit unions, the babysitting time banks, the consumer-owned REI stores for ski wear and climbing gear. High country electric co-ops helped plan out some of the famous resort towns. But Colorado is still a place where people have to create an economy of their own to get by. When I take a ride with an East African driver owner of Green Taxi, or meet a childcare co-op member who speaks only Spanish, I remember my grandfather's immigrant parents a century earlier. It wasn't investigating my family history that put me on the lookout for cooperatives. I started looking because of stirrings I noticed as a reporter among veterans of the protests that began in 2011, such as Occupy Wall Street and Spain's 15M movement. Once their uprisings simmered, the protesters had to figure out how to make a living in the economy they hadn't yet transformed, and they started creating co-ops. Some were doing it with software, cooperative social media, cloud data, music streaming, digital currencies, gig markets, and more. But this generation was not all lost to the digital. Others used cooperation to live by dirt and soil. The young radicals turned to the same kind of business that my buttoned-up, old-world, conservative grandfather did. Following them, I began following in my grandfather's footsteps before I even knew it. Both he and the protesters professed principles derived from a small group of neighbors in mid-19th century Britain, the Rochdale Society of Equitable Pioneers. These equitable pioneers were mostly weavers, working too hard for too little in textile mills, and they set up a store where they could buy flour and candles on their own terms. Equitable co-ownership and co-governance were practical tools for accomplishing this task. Through their democracy, they cut costs, ensured quality, and spun the threads that would help stitch together a global movement. But any movement can fray with time. Each generation has needed its own equitable pioneers, and these pioneers, I've learned, can leave marks far beyond their neighborhood stores. Co-ops tend to take hold when the order of things is in flux, when people have to figure out how to do what no one will do for them. Farmers had to get their own electricity when investors wouldn't bring it. Small hardware stores organized co-ops to compete with big boxes before buying local was in fashion. Before employers and governments offered insurance, people set it up for themselves. Co-ops have served as test runs for the social contracts that may later be taken for granted, and they're doing so again. This book is a sojourn among the frontiers of cooperation, past and present. Cooperation, not in the general sense of playing nice, but in the particular sense of businesses truly accountable to those they claim to serve.